Today, we mark the International Day Against Nuclear Tests, held on the 29th of August. This date was chosen to commemorate the closing of the Semipalatinsk nuclear test site in Kazakhstan 31 years ago, on the 29th of August 1991. This yearly observance is a means of remembering all those who tragically lost their lives to nuclear tests. But my friends, on this date, we are also reminded of the serious impacts that these tests have on human health and on the environment, both of which can last for generations. Excellencies, we must stop nuclear tests for good. We must ensure that we have a strong, united, and most importantly, global front in our mission to ban nuclear testing. We must implement all existing instruments towards this end. The Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty provides a strong legal framework for this endeavor. 25 years after its adoption, we must redouble our efforts to promote its universalization and implementation. In this regard, let me reiterate my call to member states who have not yet signed the treaty to do so without delay. I particularly urge the remaining Annex II states to do so, as their ratification is needed for the treaty to enter into force. Excellencies, our meeting today takes place at a time where we are faced with uncertainty and complex challenges. Global geopolitical landscape, dominated by the ongoing military confrontation in Ukraine, is rife with tension, which in turn has exacerbated the looming threat of a nuclear catastrophe by accident. This has increased the urgency of nuclear disarmament efforts. Excellencies, I sincerely urge all parties to work to exercise maximum restraint and promote dialogue and diplomacy. We need to commit to make nuclear weapons-free world a reality. The only way to eliminate this ominous threat is by simply eliminating the existence of nuclear weapons altogether. As we speak, there is an estimated stockpile of 13,000 nuclear warheads around the world. This is a major concern and is quite frankly at odds with the United Nations values. All member states, without exception, must fulfill their commitments towards nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. I welcome the holding of the 10th edition of the Non-Proliferation Treaty Review Conference in New York from 1st to 26th of August this year, after being postponed several times due to COVID-19. While the conference failed to adopt an outcome document, I commend state parties' commitment and efforts during the intensive negotiations. Going forward, I hope that the state parties continue to engage in a constructive and a meaningful dialogue to reaffirm their commitment to the Non-Proliferation Treaty as the cornerstone of the global disarmament and non-proliferation regime. As we mark the International Day Against Nuclear Tests, let us recommit by working together and taking concrete action. The only way of bringing hope to the people is by delivering a world free of nuclear weapons. Let us work together to achieve that world. I thank you. I now give the floor to Ms. Nakamitsu Izumi, Under-Secretary General and High Representative for Disarmament Affairs, who will deliver a statement on behalf of the Secretary General, His Excellency Antonio Guterres.
Thank you, Mr. President. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, I want to extend my sincere appreciation to the President of the General Assembly, His Excellency Mr. Abdullah Shahid, for convening this important annual gathering. I would also like to thank the government of the Republic of Kazakhstan for their steadfast efforts in spreading awareness about the hazardous consequences nuclear testing poses to both our health and our environment. Nuclear testing is abhorrent, and its legacy is nothing but toxic. The entry into force of a comprehensive nuclear test ban treaty must remain an urgent priority for all states. The inability last month of the 10th Review Conference of the parties to the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, or NPT, to reach consensus on a substantive outcome was a lost opportunity to strengthen the NPT and advance its goals. While the NPT parties were able to engage in sincere and meaningful dialogue at the conference and were prepared to join the consensus, only one state party had objections on the draft final outcome document. One of the key issues on which states parties were united was their overwhelming support for a global ban on nuclear testing. In the draft outcome document negotiated by states parties, the conference reaffirmed the importance of the entry into force of the CTBT at the earliest possible date as a means to constrain the development and improvement of nuclear weapons. In the draft, the conference also welcomed the increased attention in the last review cycle on assistance to the people and communities affected by nuclear weapons testing and environmental remediation. This builds on the obligations regarding victim assistance and environmental mediation contained in the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, and the forward-looking and practical work states parties have done to establish a process of their implementation. A focus on victim assistance is one tangible area of progress that has grown from the International Day Against Nuclear Weapons. This day has placed a renewed focus on human suffering and the devastating environmental consequences of nuclear testing, which adds a human security dimension to the national and collective security perspectives. I welcome the representative from civil society who, as in the previous years, has added a voice from the people of affected communities around the world. As Secretary General Guterres said on the occasion of this year's International Day Against Nuclear Tests, from the steppes from Kazakhstan to the pristine waters of the Pacific Ocean and the deserts of Australia, nuclear testing has long poisoned our planet's natural environment and the species and people who call it home. The devastation brought upon by explosive nuclear tests have lingered for decades, tormenting not just people who lived in the area of unrestrained atmospheric and underwater nuclear tests, but their succeeding generations. The global norm against nuclear testing has been firmly upheld in the 21st century, with one important exception. I join others in calling on the Democratic People's Republic of Korea to refrain from further nuclear testing, to join the CTBT, and to immediately work with relevant parties towards the complete, verifiable, irreversible, and denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. September 2021 marked the 25th anniversary of the adoption of the CTBT. In the anniversary year that followed, I am gratified to see rapid progress made in furthering the universalization of the treaty. Under the relentless energy of Executive Secretary Floyd, 4 new states have joined the treaty. I hope that this will provide motivation for the 8 remaining Annex II states, whose ratification is required for the CTBT's entry into force, to sign and ratify the treaty without delay, and the impetus for the rest of the non-Annex II states, of which will then a dozen now remain, to join the treaty. Times are not good. The risk of use of nuclear weapons is the highest since the depths of the Cold War. Relationships between nuclear-armed states continue to corrode, and nuclear weapons are assuming greater roles in national security doctrines. there are new reports about a possible resumption of nuclear testing by the DPRK. If we are to prevent catastrophe, we must urgently correct course and accelerate efforts to achieve nuclear disarmament. Ending nuclear testing once and for all by bringing the CTBT into force and making a legally binding prohibition on nuclear explosive tests a permanent reality is a concrete step we must all strive for. We need to redouble our efforts towards this outcome, one which will help lead us to our collective goal of a world free of nuclear weapons. I thank you very much for your attention.
I now give the floor to Mr. Robert Floyd, Executive Secretary of the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty Organization.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. President, for inviting me to address the General Assembly on the critical issue of banning nuclear tests. My thanks also to High Representative Izumi Nakamitsu for delivering her opening remarks and her kind words. I thank you. The date of the International Day Against Nuclear Tests marks the closing on the 29th of August 1991 of the nuclear test site in Semipalatinsk, Kazakhstan. Last year, when I addressed this high-level meeting of the General Assembly, I recalled the indelible impression which had been left upon me having stood at one of the ground zeros at Semipalatinsk. It was an experience I will never forget, and a stark reminder of why we must do everything in our power to prevent nuclear tests in the future. And yet, 1 year later, it is not clear that we're on more stable ground in this regard. Ominous dark clouds of concern are gathering. Ongoing conflicts conjure fears of the return of nuclear brinkmanship, of another nuclear test may be on the horizon. Indeed, Secretary-General Antonio Guterres recently warned that humanity is just one misunderstanding, one miscalculation away from nuclear annihilation. These grave geopolitical tensions have rightly shaken us out of our complacency. The existential threat posed by nuclear proliferation cannot be ignored. And while the Review Conference of the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, the NPT, recently concluded deliberations without consensus on a final document, I actually see cause for optimism. Optimism because despite the disappointing outcome, I observe the sincere and tireless efforts made by so many as they sought to bridge the chasm that divides the international community on this important topic. And I heard the resounding calls for action. These 4 weeks of intense negotiations have laid the groundwork for real progress in the future. We have an opportunity and a responsibility to build on this foundation and carry it forward. Regarding the CTBT, I was heartened to see an increasingly fervent swell of support expressed by NPT states parties. Indeed, the draft of the final document recalled the importance of the entry into force of the CTBT and reaffirmed the responsibility of all states that have ratified the treaty to promote the CTBT. This is a call to action to help us achieve universalisation and entry into force, and I trust it will not fall on deaf ears. And yet, there is already much to celebrate. In this, the 25th anniversary year of the opening for signature of the CTBT, I set a goal for us all to strive towards, to see at least 5 new ratifications of our treaty in 1 year. So far, 4. Dominica, the Gambia, Timor-Leste, and Tuvalu have stepped up to ratify the CTBT, and there are many more states on the way. With Dominica's ratification, we have complete adherence to the CTBT in the Latin American and Caribbean region. With Timor-Leste's ratification, we have complete adherence in Southeast Asia. These are historical milestones. Ladies and gentlemen, I applaud these countries for their efforts. They're convinced that the international community's best protection against nuclear threats is to strengthen and reinforce the global nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament regime. And they recognise that the CTBT, with its unique means of verification, is undeniably a key element of this regime. The CTBT's means of verification comprises of state-of-the-art international data centre in Vienna and a global network of monitoring stations which have proven their efficacy time and again. This critical asset will continue to deliver on the CTBT's promise to detect any nuclear explosion anytime and anywhere. For that reason, it must be properly sustained. And it has more to offer. The data gathered contributes to tsunami warning systems, earthquake and climate change studies, and a multitude of other civil and scientific applications. Our monitoring system can help reduce deaths from natural disasters. This is why I've launched the National Data Centres for All initiative, an effort supported by so many states to ensure that all state signatories of the CTBT can use this data to the fullest for the benefit of all, particularly in the smallest of states. Despite these impressive achievements and exciting initiatives, our work is not yet done. The International Day Against Nuclear Testing provides us with an important opportunity to both soberly reflect and to take stock of our efforts towards creating a world free from nuclear test explosions. It is our historic responsibility to see that our planet never again suffers the disastrous consequences of nuclear testing. Never again. The only way we can put in place an enduring and verifiable prohibition on nuclear testing is through the entry into force of the CTBT. So, to each of you and the nations of the world that you so ably represent, let's recommit ourselves to this noble cause and let's finish what we've started. I thank you all.